So this little camera here has been getting quite a lot of hype, quite a lot of attention recently. I'm sure you probably already know what this is. This is, of course, the DJI Osmo Pocket 3. They beefed it up so that now it has a 1-inch CMOS sensor inside of it, which provides better depth of field, better low light performance, and just, obviously bigger sensor, better image quality. And one of the things I was really curious to find out with the Pocket 3 was whether filters could make a difference, whether filters could improve the image quality of this camera, which is already pretty great. So Freewell sent me a giant 14 megapack of filters for the Pocket 3. This has a little bit of everything. It has solid NDs, polarized NDs, it has a snow mist diffusion filter in here, a light pollution reducing filter, and a standalone CPL. This is the biggest collection of filters, but they do have smaller packs and individual filters too, if there's just, one or two that you want. So in this video, I'm going to share with you how to set your exposure manually on the Pocket 3, how to use filters with the camera, and I'm also going to talk about whether I think, filters are worth buying for the Pocket 3 in general, whether you, buy them from Freewell or from someone else. So the Pocket 3 has a magnetized front face on the camera up here, and all of the filters are magnetized as well, and this seriously could not be easier. I mean, they just clip right onto the front like so. The grip is good. I've never had a filter fall off of I've never had one of Freewell's filters fall off of the Pocket 3. They always stay on, and then they come off just as easily. And try your best not to get your fingerprints on them, but it's practically impossible. You really have to pack and bring one of these with you. Bring a microfiber cloth with you, because you are constantly going to be cleaning these filters. And it's kind of like using the camera on the back of your phone, how it gets smeary, and you have to occasionally like wipe it on something in order before you take a photo or record a video. And because they are so small and fiddly, I mean, these can also be easily dropped and lost as well. Now, if you do drop and lose one, Freewell sells individual filters, so if you buy a pack, you could replace one without rebuying the entire pack if you needed to. But yeah, it's just something to be aware of with the user experience of these filters. And by the way, the case is really nice. The case has a magnetized plate underneath it, so these are not sitting like down inside a foam or anything like that. And it works well, like they don't fall out, haven't had a problem with that at all. And by the way, in case you're curious to know, it is entirely possible to stack more than one filter. This is a solid ND here, and then this is the snow mist diffusion filter here, and you can stack two on top of one another. So by default, the Osmo Pocket 3 uses auto exposure, which means that it controls shutter speed and ISO for you. Aperture is fixed at f2, so aperture does not change. And honestly, auto exposure on the Pocket 3 really isn't that bad. I mean, the image actually looks pretty nice, which I think is, a testament to the 1-inch CMOS sensor inside of it. That's obviously a good thing. The main limitation of auto exposure, and the reason why, people look for filters like these and they want to use these, is because when you're shooting an auto exposure, especially outdoors on a brighter day, the camera is going to jack up the shutter speed. It's going to make it really, really fast, which means that any motion in your shot is going to get jittery. Whenever you see a super fast shutter speed, it's like a dead giveaway that it was shot with like a cheap camera or like an action camera or something like that. But with the Osmo Pocket 3, we can control shutter speed. We can set the shutter speed to anything we want and use filters in order to help darken the light that is entering the front of the camera. So the first thing you want to do is pick a resolution and a frame rate, which is down here at the bottom of the screen. You just swipe up from the bottom. For me, I shoot everything in 4K, 24 frames per second. That works well for me, but obviously you could do 25, 30, whatever you want. You can also do slow motion. You could do 4K 120 on this as well. And once you know your frame rate, once you know what it is that you want to use, then you come in here to exposure, swiping in from the right side of the screen. You set it to manual, and then you have your shutter speed on the left and your ISO on the right. So again, following the 180-degree shutter rule, you want to set your shutter speed to 2 times your frame rate. So for me, I shoot in 24 frames per second. 24 times 2 is 48, rounded up to 1/50th of a second. So that's good for me. If you were shooting at 30 frames per second, you would use 1/60th of a second. And then over here on the right side of the screen, this is ISO. Now, obviously, the higher the ISO value, the more noise you're going to introduce into your image. And in my experience, as long as you keep that somewhere between like 50 and 400, you should be good. If you go above 400, it starts to introduce some noise, which removes detail and texture. and sharpness from your image, and that's not really something that you want. So as long as you keep it between 50 and 400, that's a good thing. In addition to fixed ISO values, as you would expect to see, like 50, 100, 200, 400, it also supports ISO ranges, including 50 to 200, 50 to 400, and other options as well. And this is really nice because when you're outdoor shooting, let's say that you set your exposure with an ND filter on in a bright area, and then you moved into an area that was darker, like, cloud passed in front of the sun or whatever, your scene just gets darker. Well, if you set it to a range though, then the Pocket 3 has some latitude, and the Pocket 3 can step in and say, looks like you need to raise your ISO a little bit, and it'll automatically raise your ISO and brighten your shot and keep it from getting too underexposed. And in my experience, this works surprisingly well, and it's a really nice feature. So yeah, you could use a fixed ISO value if you want to, but if you know you're going to be in some kind of mixed lighting environment, or you just want to play it safe and make sure that your exposure is always good, set it to a low range, like 50 to 200, 50 to 400, something like that, and you'll be fine. Okay, so once you have your shutter speed dialed in, like I have 1/50th of a second on mine, and your ISO set, I have 50 to 400 ISO set up, the next thing you want to check is this number up here at the top left. This is the EV number, which stands for exposure value. Now this EV number up here is a little bit confusing and a little bit misleading, unfortunately, because it is not displaying f-stops. Like if you see +1 or +2 there, it does not mean that your image is overexposed by 1 stop or 2 stop, which makes it a little bit challenging when you're looking at that number to know like what density of filter you need. My recommendation is that, if you see like +1, start with the lowest density filter, which would be ND8. Give that a try. If it doesn't, if it's not strong enough, pop on another one and keep trying, some solid NDs or the polarized NDs until you get that EV number fluctuating somewhere between -1 and +1. If you go over that in either direction, you need to use a different filter. So then when you record footage with the ND filter on, you should notice that motion looks a little bit smoother. It looks more natural because you were shooting using a slower shutter speed. It's not going to look as jagged, not quite as digital as the auto exposure mode. And I think it always looks better no matter what type of footage you're creating, whether it's just you walking and talking, carrying the camera. And it especially looks better if there's something in your shot that's moving quickly, like some cars passing by, something like that. The look is going to look more professional and a little more polished than auto exposure footage using a faster shutter speed. Solid NDs are typically the purest, like they have the least amount of color cast, they have the least effect on your image. All they really do typically is just reduce the amount of light that's entering so you get that nicer looking, slower shutter. So if all you want to do is just shoot at a slower shutter speed but retain the natural color and look of the Pocket 3, you would use a solid ND. If you choose to use the dark CPLs in this collection, otherwise known as the NDPL filters, these have polarized glass. So in addition to darkening exposure and allowing you to shoot at a slower shutter speed, because the glass is polarized, it also helps minimize reflections, it helps increase clarity, and it helps increase density of color in your shot as well. The effect that this creates is not something that can be done in post. You can't like polarize your footage later. It's the kind of thing you have to do in camera when shooting. Now, unlike the solid NDs, these dark CPLs do contribute some color cast, but I have to say, I'm not hating the color cast that these are creating, because they add a little bit of warmth, a little bit of yellow to the image, and I think it looks quite nice. And it definitely does help increase clarity, increase contrast. This is a lot like a drone, because it's not, you're moving around, your position may change relative to the sun, and it's definitely not like landscape photography where you're dialing everything in for one specific shot. You could be moving all around with this camera. So what Freewell has done is they've put a little white tick mark up here at top left. And if you're not sure like what angle you want, like if you don't really want to sit here and fiddle with this and get it absolutely perfect, just rotate the red ring to the white tick mark at the top left, leave it there, and that should be good enough for shooting outdoors with the Pocket 3. Okay, so one of the filters that is included in the 14 filter mega pack from Freewell, they include a diffusion mist filter. This is a quarter strength of filter. And a diffusion mist filter, if you've never used one before, these are effect filters that you put on a camera when shooting video in order to help reduce clarity and make the image look a little less digital, a little less, pristine, a little less clinical, I think is a good way to put it. It refracts light, and there's all different types of diffusion mist filters that are, being made by all these different companies, and they all have slightly different behaviors and characteristics. Now, I do have some prior experience with these snow mist diffusion filters from Freewell. I've used one on my iPhone before, and I thought it looked nice on that camera. But I have to say, I'm not the biggest fan of how this filter looks on the Pocket 3. And I think it could be because of the quarter strength of this filter. If it was 1/8, maybe that would be better. But 1/4, I feel like it's a little bit strong and it's a little bit obvious. I mean, to me, like if I'm using a diffusion mist filter, I want it to not stand out. I just want it to kind of seamlessly blend into the video and not be noticeable. But I feel like it's really noticeable on the Pocket 3 because the highlights get rather bloomy and the shadows and the blacks get kind of milky and the whole image just gets a little gray. And yeah, I'm just, I don't know, I'm just really not a fan of how it looks. I thought this was going to be great, but I don't really care for it. So I don't think I'd be shooting with this on the Pocket 3. I'd be sticking to the other filters. Okay, so final thoughts here. Should you buy filters for the Pocket 3, and are these filters from Freewell worth it? If you are going to be buying filters, should you consider these from Freewell? Well, I will tell you from past experience that I've used a number of Freewell filters on other cameras. I've used them on drones. I've used them on my Canon camera. I've used all different types, and Freewell always makes good quality filters, good glass that contributes minimal color cast. I think the main thing to think about, and the main thing to consider, whether you're thinking about getting these from Freewell or perhaps some other brand that makes them, because there are a few different companies that make them, the main thing to consider is whether you really want to put up with the hassle of using filters, because filters will slow you down. Because in order to use them effectively, you have to change the camera from auto to manual exposure, which means you are then in control of shutter speed and ISO, and you have to dial those things in. And this is something I should probably make a separate video about, but the Pocket 3, at least right now, maybe there'll be a firmware update at some point. The Pocket 3, like evaluating exposure is not that great because it does not include a histogram. It does not include zebras. There's no way really to evaluate your exposure outside of that weird EV number, which doesn't really tell you a whole lot. So it's a little bit hit and miss. You kind of have to, experiment with it in order to, really use it effectively. Then, of course, there's the hassle of, keeping the filters clean, adding and removing them from the camera. And by the way, I forgot to mention, but if you power off the Pocket 3 with a filter attached, it cannot fold itself all the way up inside of the gimbal as it normally does. Usually it's like folded up this way to protect the front of the lens and keep it from getting scratched and stuff like that, which is good. I think it's a really cool feature of the gimbal. But unfortunately, I feel like it needs just like an extra millimeter or something, and then a filter. Then you could leave a filter on the camera all the time. Like I would love just to have like a clear UV filter or something, throw that on there. But this isn't a Freewell thing. This is a DJI thing. Maybe in a future version, they could, change the hardware design so that filters could be left on. I think that'd be great. So really, I think it comes down to you and how you see yourself typically using the Pocket 3. Like if you're someone that just wants to flip open the screen, hit record and go, and just let the camera take care of everything for you with regards to exposure, well, I don't think filters are going to be for you. I feel like filters are just probably going to drive you a little bit crazy because you do have to keep them clean and you have to set your exposure manually, and that just may not be for you. But if you're someone who's a little more particular and you want to squeeze the best possible image quality out of the camera and you don't mind setting your exposure manually, you're comfortable doing all of that, well, I think filters do make a qualitative difference in the footage that you're able to get out of an already excellent camera. And, the 1-inch CMOS sensor does look really nice in auto exposure mode, but these filters do sweeten it just a little bit more and do make it look nicer. But, something to be realistic about is something to keep in mind, especially if you are, coming over from an interchangeable lens camera and you have experience using ND filters. ND filters on the Pocket 3 are not going to make your background blurrier. They're not going to make your bokeh look nicer. They're not going to have any effect on depth of field because the aperture in the Pocket 3 is fixed at f2. So the background's going to look exactly the same, whether you choose to use ND filters or not. As for this particular pack, this 14 pack of filters from Freewell, I do think for some people this could be overkill because it includes a light pollution reducing filter, which you would only really use like, at night or something if you're doing like cityscape video, or maybe doing, some kind of astro work, something like that, shooting in the low light mode on this camera. That might be nice to have, but if you don't see yourself using it, that's just a filter you're never going to use. And also this pack includes some really strong filters like ND256 and ND1000 that are only really useful if, say, you're doing like time-lapse videos, something like that. I don't see myself ever using those. I think a pack that is probably more reasonable, that would be, a better fit for most people, would be the all-day 8-pack from Freewell. That one includes the major solid NDs and the ND-PL filters and the CPL too. And those are really the main filters, I think. Those are the ones that you would probably end up using the most often. And that costs a little bit less than this one. But obviously, if you want everything, you just want to get like one big pack of filters and be done with it, this is a really good price. And this is a nice add-on for the Pocket 3, I think. So if you want to check out these filters from Freewell, I will leave a link to them down below in the video description and the other, collections of Freewell Pocket 3 filters that I mentioned. And I'll also leave a link to the Pocket 3 from DJI as well if you're interested in picking one of these up. I will tell you though that the creative combo version of this, it appears to be sold out and back ordered, at least at the time of this video. I guess demand really is pretty strong for it. So they're a little hard to come by right now. You may have to wait a little while to get one, but I think it's all with good reason. I think this is a pretty exciting little camera, and I'm definitely looking forward to taking this out and using it more in the future. As always, thanks so much for your time and attention. I do appreciate it. If you learned something from this video and it was helpful, please take a moment and give this video a thumbs up down below. And if you would like to hang out again with me in the future, remember to subscribe as well. See you next time.